Now that I've had the CL Racing board in the quad for a while, I thought I'd give it a quick follow-up review. So this is going to be a review of the flight controller, but I've only had it in this one quad, so got to take into account everything else on the quad really with this review. So even though I might say something's good or something's bad, your mileage may vary a bit depending on the other components in your quad. So first off, the flight controller itself works great. The quad's nice and stable. It flies really well. The gyro itself doesn't seem to be particularly susceptible to vibration. Either that or I'm not getting much vibration on this quad. And that's a good thing. You want that in a good flight controller. Quite a lot of flight controllers these days are quite good at doing that sort of thing. I mean, this is an F4, so it's got plenty of processing power. It's running, I put Betaflight 3.2, I think release candidate 3 on this one was the latest one when I flashed it. I know 4's out now, it's probably pretty close to final release as well. And the dynamic filtering on that is pretty good. So that did work with this board, which was great. So as far as the actual board goes, the board layout's actually pretty good. I know in my previous video, which I will link in the top, I said that I wasn't so sure about having pads on the top and the bottom, and then being pads, not through holes. Turns out that's actually a pretty good layout. It lets the pads be nice and big, which it makes them really easy to solder to. Plus they're grouped together quite sensibly. So you've got all of your receiver pads on the bottom, you've got your camera pads on the top at the front, and you've got your transmitter pads at the top at the back. And it's all actually laid out a fairly reasonable way. So that turned out to be much better than I thought it was going to be. The other good thing is actually it's got a built-in buzzer. A buzzer is something that's really handy on a flight control board because you get quite a bit of feedback from the way it beeps and the noises that it makes, and I normally forget to put one on. So the fact that it's got one built in means I didn't need to forget. And I've already noticed that it's making all the old noises that quads used to make that my latest builds haven't been making because I forget to put a buzzer on them. Now, as far as the downside goes, that buzzer's not particularly loud. You're not going to be using it as a battery warning. You're probably not going to hear it while the quad's in flight, flying around. I've definitely had louder buzzers on quads before. And you can sort of use it as a model finding tone as long as you know vaguely where it's crashed. It's going to make some noise, so that's better than it not making any noise, but it's not going to be particularly loud. If you've crashed in long grass and you kind of know it's between that tree and that tree over there, sort of walk to the area, turn the buzzer on, and you'll probably find it. But you can get the same effect through the motors these days with D-Shot. Or just setting them so that the motors will start buzzing if they're not armed for a few minutes. And the motors themselves will be quite a bit louder than the buzzer on the board. So the usefulness of that buzzer is a bit 50-50. It is useful to have, but not necessarily as useful as putting a louder buzzer on the board itself. You also have to cable the board as it's been designed. There's really no other way of doing this. If you're trying to use this board for anything other than a race quad, you're going to struggle. It's things like a lot of the UART outputs only have the one appropriate pin on the board, so the receiving UART only has the receive pin. There's no transmit pin exposed anywhere on the board, so you have to use it for that. The telemetry UART only has the TX pin exposed. There's actually only one UART on the board that has both the transmit and receive pins, and that means using the flight controller for anything other than a race quad is going to be quite difficult. However, using it for a race quad, it's going to work really well. It simplifies everything out for you and basically tells you how to put it all together. It's solder these things to these things and it'll work, and it does. So one of the big annoyances that I had with it, and I said this before and it's still an annoyance, is the telemetry. So the FreeSky SmartPort telemetry is inverted, and this, because it's an F4, isn't capable of doing an inverted signal in software, and there is no hardware inverter on the board. So that means you have to either use a hardware inverter, and I did show one in my original review. Turns out you can't use that one, it has to be a bidirectional inverter. Or you need to hack your telemetry pin on your receiver. I've done a video about that which I will link in the top corner, and there are other ways of doing the same thing on different receivers, but it does mean that you're soldering directly to one of the pins on a component on your receiver. If you mess that up, you could damage the receiver, and they're not that easy to solder to. They're not that difficult, but they're not really easy either. So unless you're really good at soldering, or unless you're half decent at soldering at least, then probably not something you want to be trying, because you can damage the receiver. And these things, they're not hideously expensive, but they're not free either, so it's not something that you want to mess up. Having said that though, Little Bird tells me there might actually be a new revision of this board coming that does have an inverted telemetry port. Now I've got no confirmation of that, so I can't say 100% that this is going to fix it, or this is going to be a thing, but that's definitely a rumour that I've heard. And that would be a good thing, because that really is like the major downside in my book. So the other thing to note about this board is I haven't tested the OSD. I didn't cable it up. I don't generally fly with an OSD, so I didn't try it. There have been reports of people having interference problems when they've cabled up their OSD, and then when they just bypass it, the problems go away. And there have been an equal number of people that have reported that it works perfectly fine. So I can't really comment either way because I haven't tested it, but that's something to take into consideration. If you definitely want an OSD, you might have to think about ways of, I don't know, isolating the noise. It's probably generated from noise from the ESCs, so maybe some sort of capacitor, making sure you've got your video wound with the ground or something. I really don't know, because I haven't used it. I don't know what the problem is, and I don't really know how to fix it. All I know is that there are reports of it not working particularly well, and then there are an equal number of reports of it working perfectly fine. It is the standard Betaflight OSD, which is really, really configurable. The one thing that I haven't been able to test with this board is the current sensor, because I don't use an OSD and I don't record current anyway. I know it's working because I can see it in the configurator, but I haven't actually tested how well it works. I'm sure it works really well, but that would be actually a really nice feature to have. I'm working on a way of recording the current on my Tyrannus so I can see what's going on, but I haven't got that working yet. I think I'll probably do a video about that once I get it working. Yeah, so all in all, this board's actually turned out to be really good. It's meant that this build has a single board in it, which is pretty cool. This is the first build I've got that's got a single board in the stack, and it flies really well. I don't think I've got any flight footage. If I have, I'll have probably already put it up by now. But yeah, the quad itself flies really smooth. I was quite impressed with that. That's probably a combination of the flight controller, the ESCs, and the motors and the props. It just all works really well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend getting this flight controller if you're using it in a race quad. If you're planning on using it in something else, I'd say avoid, get something different. But if you're using it for a race quad, which is the purpose of the board, definitely consider this as one of the better flight controllers I've had. Cool, thanks very much for watching this. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and maybe even think about subscribing. Thanks very much.